Who are a few people we'd love to kick out of society? Let's find out. Starting with number 6, Exit Row Karen. An unidentified woman caused a major disruption on a Frontier Airlines flight, forcing the entire plane to deboard. This chaos unfolded at Charlotte Douglas International Airport in North Carolina. The woman, whose identity wasn't disclosed, got into a heated argument with flight attendants over exit row instructions. The incident began when the woman refused to comply with the mandatory exit row briefing. Passengers, or as some might say, heroes, in these rows must verbally confirm their willingness to help out in an emergency. The woman, however, refused to give this verbal confirmation, saying she would prioritize her own safety over helping others. This weird defiance quickly escalated into a full-blown argument with the flight crew. So the crew was like, fine, whatever, then change seats. But she straight up refused, probably because she didn't want to give up the oodles of legroom she was planning on enjoying. But that legroom comes with a price. The situation only got worse from there, with the woman repeatedly arguing and even claiming she needed to call her lawyer because she had done nothing wrong. Her absurd behavior prompted the pilot to announce over the public address system that the flight would be delayed until law enforcement arrived. As the needless argument continued, other passengers started to get increasingly irritated, pleading with the woman to comply so they could just get on their way. But instead, the entire plane had to be deboarded while the situation was resolved. Passengers returned to the waiting area, frustrated by the unexpected delay caused by one person's refusal to say that they'd help everyone if the plane crashed, which is so weird. Eventually, law enforcement arrived, and the woman was escorted off the plane in handcuffs. Passengers watched from the terminal as she was led down the stairs to a waiting police vehicle. Throughout the ordeal, the woman insisted she was innocent and maintained that she had agreed to the exit row requirements, though witnesses and flight attendants obviously disagreed. The probability of her being required to fulfill her exit row obligations is essentially zero. She was probably just joking at first, but once the situation became serious, she should have just left the plane as requested on her own once it got to that level. The fact that she actually had to get escorted off the plane in cuffs by the police while making everyone else leave the plane is another whole level of selfishness. Number 5, Boca Bash. A couple of Florida teenagers turned themselves into authorities after being seen in a viral video dumping trash into the Atlantic Ocean from a boat. They now face felony pollution charges. The teens were charged with causing pollution harmful to human health, animal life, or property. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, known as the FWC, arrested the teens, with charges carrying a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison and a $50,000 fine, which would be insane if they actually got that level of punishment. Because of their ages, their identities remain undisclosed. The incident took place after the annual Boca Bash, a local boating event. Video footage captured by content creator Wavy Boats shows the teens dumping trash into the ocean, which is kind of weird that people still do that, right? Aren't the younger generation supposed to be all about the environment? Anyway, in the video, the 15-year-old driver of the boat is seen emptying a trash bin containing plastic bottles, cans, food bags, and other items into the water. He then held the basket over his head, apparently celebrating dumping the trash in the water like a big boy. Drone footage revealed the scattered trash being dispersed by the waves. The 16-year-old was also seen dumping a trash bin into the ocean. Following the incident, an FWC investigator visited the home of the boat's registered owner. The 15-year-old's father confirmed they were seeking legal counsel and explained that the incident didn't represent their family's values. They obviously raised their kids to be firmly in the "don't empty trash into the ocean" camp. The father of the other teen also said they were getting a lawyer. The lawyers seem a bit unnecessary, since they'll probably spend more on lawyers than they would on any actual fines and community service they'll likely be getting. But whatever. Witnesses on the boat identified the teens, and the parents of one of the teens issued an apology to those affected. They started spouting some nonsense about their commitment to ocean conservation and indicated that their kid would participate in community service to learn the importance of environment responsibility. Boca Bash organizers distanced themselves from the incident, condemning the teens' actions. They hope that legal consequences would serve as a public reminder of the importance of protecting Florida's waters. Number 4, self-donation. An unidentified woman from Australia, who apparently has no soul, was arrested for allegedly stealing a charity tin in broad daylight. In May of 2024, a Melbourne family discovered that their charity tin, placed in their Ferguson Player Bakery, which is a chain of bakeries in Australia, had gone missing. The donations were intended for the Royal Children's Hospital. Donations had accumulated to more than a few $100s. CCTV footage captured a brunette woman glancing around before swiftly grabbing the charity tin and hiding it in a brown handbag under her vest in broad daylight. Annalise Grech, the owner of the bakery, was completely shocked and disappointed. She acknowledged the thief must have some personal issues, such as missing her soul, but obviously didn't feel like there was really any excuse for stealing from a children's hospital. The stolen tin contained generous donations from customers, including change and tips, which had significantly added to the amount inside. Miss Grech urged the thief to return the stolen money, explaining that it was meant for sick children. She appealed to the thief's kindness, hoping she would reconsider and return the funds. It didn't work. So, Victoria Police launched an investigation after receiving a tip from a witness. The woman was tracked down and arrested. She then faced an out-of-sessions hearing and was charged with theft and obtaining property by deception. But as of the release of this video, the case hasn't gone to court. And who does this sort of thing anyway? Isn't that kind of a universal thing to feel bad and want to help incredibly sick children? This is worse than fake charities because she was literally stealing from these kids. It's one thing if someone chooses to not donate, but it's another to actually steal from donations. Number 3, scammer revenge. Here's a story about someone we'd love to keep in society. A 92-year-old lady from South Carolina, affectionately called Booma by her family, found a unique way to deal with relentless scam callers. Instead of ignoring them, she decided to give them a taste of their own medicine. We like her already. Living alone, but with a sharp mind and great sense of humor, Booma started talking nonsense to the scammers until they gave up. This amusing tactic not only brought her joy, but also entertained her granddaughter, Cheyenne Tony, who often captured these moments on video. In one instance, Booma decided to confront a scammer by asking if they believed in God. She then explained that she didn't need their products because she was expecting to be raptured soon. The scammer, clearly frustrated, ended the call abruptly. In another call, Booma asked for a senior discount, which irritated the scammer to the point of accusing her of wasting his time before hanging up. Her ability to turn the tables on these callers wasn't only impressive, but also hilarious. In one of the more dramatic interactions, a scammer tried to convince Booma that a loved one was in trouble and needed bail money after causing a serious car accident. Booma responded with fake sobs and exaggerated distress, which eventually led the scammer to hang up, unable to handle her over-the-top reaction. These interactions, videoed by her granddaughter, became a source of entertainment and laughter for their family. Booma's clever tactics proved effective in deterring scammers while highlighting the importance of staying vigilant against fraud, especially for the elderly. It's a reminder that while scammers target vulnerable individuals, sometimes the tables are turned. We could see how that tactic could really work well too. We've all been trapped by that sweet old lady down the street who regularly, unknowingly traps you in these long, rambling conversations. The fact that Booma is doing this to scammers is hilarious. Number 2, hot coffee. Elazar Ravello, a 64-year-old Florida man, because, of course, Florida man, turned himself into authorities after a heated incident at a McDonald's drive-thru in Miami Springs, Florida. The altercation, caught on video, resulted in Ravello being charged with felony battery for allegedly splashing hot coffee on a manager. The trouble began when Ravello, a regular customer known for ordering a sausage McMuffin with an egg on the side and a discounted senior coffee, got into an argument over the cost of his breakfast. Frustrated with the price, he sat there and argued with the drive-thru attendant and then with the shift manager, Stephanie Restuccia. Apparently, there was a price discrepancy of a few cents. So, Restuccia had intervened, explaining to Ravello she didn't like how he was treating her staff and warned him that his behavior could lead to a ban from the store. Ravello, however, began to yell at her and threatened to throw the hot coffee at her, which is actually a pretty legit threat considering McDonald's coffee temperature is comparable to liquid hot magma. Of course, he later denied denied ever having said that. Not that that matters considering what happened next. Surveillance footage showed Ravello in his car arguing with an employee at the drive-thru window. When the employee handed him the coffee, he slapped it away, causing the hot liquid to spill on Restuccia's arm. She was left with burns and later expressed her disbelief at the incident, saying that she didn't think he'd actually do it. All of you in customer service jobs know how dumb some people can be and the crap they'll say to you because they're so mad. Despite Ravello's denial of the threat, the video evidence and the testimony from Restuccia led to his arrest. He was later released on a $5,000 bond. There might be some of you who remember that whole thing in the early 90s where that lady sued McDonald's over hot coffee because she claimed she didn't know it was hot. She spilled it in her lap in her car and made a big deal about it. The incident became this running joke about frivolous lawsuits like, "Oh, you didn't know the coffee was hot, you dummy." But it was no joke. She was 79 and she was sitting in the passenger seat when the lid on her cup popped off, spilling the coffee in her lap. She ended up with third-degree burns on her legs and she ultimately succumbed to her injuries. So the fact that this guy even threatened to throw that coffee at someone is a pretty legit threat. And it was over pennies? Yeah, his life must suck that bad. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned right here to find out how cheating on his wife actually saved this guy hundreds of millions. Number 1. Unintentional danger. Nashali Alma from Tampa, Florida, made headlines for her incredible bravery after fending off an attacker in her apartment gym. Recognized by the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, Nashali received the first ever Strength and Courage Award for her courageous actions. While working out alone in the gym of her apartment complex, Nashali let in a man she had seen before, thinking he was there to exercise. So it's not like she was being stupid, right? Most people would do the same thing. It'd be weird to just leave someone by the door when you know they live there. So while Nashali continued her routine, Xavier Thomas Jones approached her, grabbed her waist, and attempted to pin her down. Despite the terrifying situation, Nashali fought back hard, hitting his head and yelling for him to get away. She managed to break free and run to a nearby apartment where she called 911. Thomas Jones fled the scene, but he was arrested within 24 hours. Nashali's story didn't end there. The sheriff's department had a ceremony to give her the first ever Strength and Courage Award. She expressed her joy and pride, saying she hoped her experience would inspire other women to learn self-defense, talking about the importance of fighting back and making an escape. Thomas Jones had a similar incident the day after, where he tried to enter another woman's apartment. This time, he was chased away by the woman's fiance. Nashali, featured in a sheriff's office video, urged other women to speak out and never give up. Reflecting on the day Thomas Jones was caught, she said that it was a relief knowing that someone like him is put in jail and probably won't be out anytime soon. We're glad this story has a happy ending, and we also encourage all you ladies out there to always be vigilant and protect yourselves. If you can't get over to a self-defense class, at least keep a taser or some mace on you. Lou pays at his favorite gentleman's club in town in Houston, and he's already downed quite a few drinks. He's already spent several hours with his favorite, let's call her a personal companion for the night. But he has a huge problem on his hands. You guessed it, it's because he's still married. Normally, the average cheater would think it's a big problem that they completely smell like whomever they're doing the cheating with. But this time, the smell isn't the big issue. Lou will just go to a gas station and rub some gasoline on himself before going home. That was his go-to move to cover any suspicious scents up by spilling gas on himself for the umpteenth time. The big problem now is that he found out his lady friend is pregnant. Lou Pei is a Chinese American who made a fortune from working with the now defunct energy company Enron Energy Services. Pei came to the United States when he was just 2 years old and his family settled in Maryland. As a child, he was considered a math prodigy, and he eventually earned a bachelor's and a master's degree from the University of Maryland. Pei soon started working at Enron and quickly rose through the ranks to become a high-ranking executive. In 1987, Lou Pei left the SEC to go and work for Enron. At the time, Enron was a small regional energy supplier. Pei quickly rose through the ranks at Enron and quickly became the CEO of a subsidiary called Enron Energy Services. At the time Pei became the CEO of that subsidiary, Enron was experiencing extraordinary growth. The company's business was booming, and things were going as well as they possibly could. Pei was a generally introverted and reclusive person. Very soon, he became known as the Invisible CEO because of his introverted personality. Despite being introverted, he had a penchant for living a lavish lifestyle, and that lifestyle would eventually come to symbolize not only Pei, but the executive management of Enron in its totality. In the end, Enron would face serious money problems, and a fine-tooth comb would be used to comb through all of Pei's excesses. Enron Energy Services, the subsidiary that Pei had control over, was Enron's retail unit. The business of the EES, as it was called, was to sell gas and power directly to homes at a market price. The company wanted to displace the pseudo-government entities that sold power to people and wanted to offer that same energy at a reduced price directly to customers. The company spent a lot of money on advertisements as it needed to convince people to pool their energy needs directly and purchase them from Enron. However, the implementation of this strategy was a monumental disaster. Within just 5 years, the company blew through $500 million in expenses without generating any significant income. Despite the failure of Enron, Liu Pei was having the time of his life. As a CEO of the company, he earned around $100 million in salary over 5 years. He also received a lot of valuable Enron stock that was worth hundreds of millions. So, what did Liu Pei do with all the money he was making from the Enron sinking ship? Well, the gentleman spent it at gentlemen's clubs, as was appropriate for a gentleman. Despite being a reclusive man, Pei came alive at night. He frequented his magical clubs as often as he could and was quite fascinated by the dancers in them. He was so fascinated by these clubs that he visited them every night and often had meetings in them. After the meetings, Pei would even treat the best performing salesmen to special encounters with the dancers in the club. Pei didn't just go to the clubs to watch dancers. He also made sure to spend lavishly on them. The dancers often didn't believe that Pei, a reclusive and introverted man, was such a powerful CEO. So he spent a lot of money on them to prove that he was indeed powerful and wealthy. Pei sometimes even took these dancers to his high-rise offices to show off, and the club parties would continue at Enron's offices late into the night. However, Pei had a wife, and wives typically don't like exotic dancers. So Pei didn't want his wife to find out he was spending time learning how to dance in special dance clubs. So he did what any reasonable and properly adjusted man would do. He went to gas stations and poured a little gasoline on himself before going home. He reasoned that this would get rid of the dancer's scent on him and that his wife wouldn't notice a thing. Judging by how often he frequented these clubs, we have one thought and one bit of advice. 1. Pei's wife must have thought he was really bad at putting gas in his car that had horrible gas mileage. And 2, pouring gas on yourself when potentially dealing with an angry woman isn't a good idea. Eventually, Pei's adventures at these clubs blossomed into a full-on affair, or magical romance, depending on your perspective, with a dancer named Melanie Fool. As luck would have it, Melanie Fool was also married and had 2 kids. Things got messier for Pei when Miss Fool got pregnant, and Mrs. Pei eventually found out about her husband's extracurricular activities. This time, he couldn't hide a baby bump with a gasoline scent. Mrs. Pei wasted no time suing for divorce, and Pei found himself in a precarious situation. And things were about to get even worse for Pei because why not? Around the same time Pei was dealing with his marital headaches, the higher-ups at Enron were discovering Enron Energy Services' massive failures and Pei's dancing expenses that were so vast the reports ended up on the desk of Enron boss Kenneth Lay. While Pei wasn't exactly fired from the company, Enron advised him that things wouldn't go on smoothly if he stayed on as CEO. So Pei made what must have been the hardest decision in his life. He left Enron. At the time, it must have felt like he was making a huge mistake, but time would prove that he'd made the best decision of his life. The divorce was hard on Pei. His wife had evidence that he cheated, and she was going to get every penny she could in the divorce settlement. The case was so expensive for Pei that he was forced to sell all of his Enron stock to pay his divorce settlement. Despite being in such a difficult situation, Pei was still quite lucky. At the time he was selling his Enron shares, they were around peak value. Enron's all-time stock share price value was about $90, and Pei managed to sell all of his stock for an average price of $72 apiece. At the end of the day, he made around $250 million from selling his shares. Pei paid his wife, Lana, a lump sum of tens of millions of dollars. He also had to forfeit his Houston mansion, a Houston condo, and a $3 million home in Hawaii as part of the settlement. Left with no wife, no job, and a pregnant mistress, Liu Pei felt like there was only one thing he could do. Marry the dancer carrying his baby and move to Colorado. By the time Pei was settling down in in Colorado, a few things were happening over with his former employer. Pay had left Enron in June of 2001, but just 2 months later, the entire company was in trouble. The share price was tumbling down a hill, and in October, Enron had lost 2/3 of its value. At this point, the CEOs of Enron were all selling their shares while telling employees that every little thing was going to be okay. By November of that year, a single Enron share was worth just $1. By December of that year, the company had been exposed as a huge multinational fraud and was eventually filing for bankruptcy. If Pay had just delayed selling his stocks for a few months, he would have been left smelling like gasoline and dancers holding an empty bag of Enron shares, and could have possibly been facing criminal charges. When he got to Colorado, Pay bought the Taylor Ranch for $23 million. The ranch was so big that for a short while, Pay was the second largest landowner in Colorado. The ranch even had a mountain, and locals began calling it Mount Pay. Pay approached the purchase of the property very carefully. He didn't buy the land at once. Instead, he bought the entire ranch incrementally. He first purchased 23,800 acres of the southern third of the ranch for $6.9 million in cash. He also swapped real estate worth $2.6 million in Texas for it. 2 years later, he completed the purchase. This means that Pay had started purchasing the land even before his wife found out about his affair and he had to leave Enron. Unfortunately for Pay, the property was a subject of intense controversy. Before Pay bought it, it had been used communally by a community of ranchers. These ranchers expected the same unreserved access they'd had to the land, but Pay was having none of it. If the ranchers had all been exotic dancers, he probably would have considered it, but they weren't. Instead of giving them access, Pay decided to beef up security. He fenced out the ranchers better than every other previous owner and employed people to patrol his perimeter. Aside from that, he diligently pursued trespassing complaints in the courts, but the issues surrounding the land couldn't be easily disposed of. The ranch had been a part of a larger portion of land ceded to the United States after the Mexico-America War. Unfortunately, the legal rights surrounding the land as a common area nearby ranch owners were never spelled out. By 1960, the land was purchased by North Carolina lumber magnate Jack Taylor. The legal rights of surrounding ranchers to use the land were in legal obscurity by the time Taylor bought it. However, Taylor knew that the locals believed that they had some claim to the ranch. Unfortunately for the villagers, Taylor didn't believe in those rights and he tried to secure the ranch as his private domain. The efforts of Taylor to restrict the locals from the land triggered a feud that went on for decades. Taylor went to court several times, and the state and federal courts affirmed his right to secure his property. However, the local government wasn't too enthusiastic to enforce the court's judgments. In the end, it was the judgment of Taylor's neighbors that mattered the most. One night, in 1975, a bullet ripped through Taylor's roof and shattered his ankle. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, and he left Colorado soon after. He never returned to the ranch and ran operations there from North Carolina. The person who pulled the trigger was never caught. In the 1980s, Jack Taylor breathed his last breath, and his child, Zachary Taylor, yes, just like everyone's favorite president, permitted the locals' use of the land. However, Zachary only allowed limited access, and this negatively impacted the agrarian industry in the county. Losing access to pastures forced many local ranchers to either pack up or drastically reduce the number of their herds. In due time, Lou Pay started buying up the land little by little. For a while, Pay had Zachary Taylor had a legal dispute over the extent of logging that Zachary had allowed on the ranch before selling. However, the dispute was soon settled and Pay had everything he wanted. He had all of the ranch, his pregnant mistress, and a fortune in Enron stock sales in the bank. But instead of just settling into the ranch and keeping a low profile, Pay made some important moves. Zachary had hoped that Pay would offer the villagers even more access to the land, but that wasn't to be. When a policy consultant tried to talk to Pay and come up with a plan that would make it easier for villagers to access the ranch, she was rebuffed. It appeared that Pay was quite secretive about his plans for the ranch, and those plans did not involve access for villagers. Pay was so secretive that his team told the analyst not to even mention Lou Pay when discussing plans for the ranch with them. It was clear that Pay wanted to hide his involvement with the property. Pay's first course of action was to resurvey the land and ask neighbors to prove their boundaries, all at their own expense. In a few cases, some of the neighbors lost areas of the ranch that they'd had access to for generations. Pay also employed construction workers to build bigger fences that secured the ranch completely. Some of those fences are alleged to have cut right into the property of other people. Of course, the ranch management denied these claims and argued that they were simply maintaining old fences. Before long, the locals realized that Pay was an even worse owner than Jack Taylor. During Taylor's time, they could always find different ways to get on the property. However, Pay's fences made that practically impossible. There was no access, and that was the end of the story. There were also rumors that Pay wanted to divert water from from major streams, impound them, and then sell them through a private water marketing company owned by Enron. He also planned to purchase water and land rights from his neighbors to complete his domination of the area. At the same time, the locals continually got into heated arguments with the ranch hands Pei employed. These arguments ranged from accusations that hunting activities were being stifled to arguments over hiking rights. While a lot of people accused Pei of being a bad neighbor, they also admitted that he'd started the work of restoring the forest and the ranch. Interestingly, Pei also showed some willingness to help the community. It was said that he had a soft spot for young people and seniors and was willing to help the community by donating to worthwhile programs. However, that was where his generosity stopped. He was never willing to discuss community access to his property. Despite selling his Enron stocks and becoming quite rich, Pei was also never willing to give out raises, unless it was to exotic dancers. Anytime he gave a raise to an individual worker, he told the worker to not inform colleagues so they didn't all start clamoring for more money. All through Pei's ownership of the land, there were lawsuits and potential for lawsuits from almost every angle. The case was constantly being dragged in front of the judge, and Pei constantly had to defend his use of the land. But the fights didn't last forever. A year after leaving Enron, Pei finally got tired of all the issues that came with owning the Taylor Ranch. He sold the ranch for almost $60 million, which was more than double what he'd bought it for. These days, Pei is still married to the dancer he divorced his wife for, and they have 3 children. So, to all of you who are positive that one dancer you saw last night was really into you, there's a chance. You just have to be a millionaire, because apparently that helps. Pei might have sold his Colorado ranch, but he still operates ranches in Texas and Virginia. He's also very interested in Olympic dressage these days. And no, he's never had to face any serious consequences for his role in the Enron debacle. That's the sort of luck you get when you divorce your wife to marry a dancer you met at a club. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you'd rather do. Fly Spirit Airlines for a 2-hour flight or drive to the destination.